Welcome back. I'm your host, Samantha Reigle. I've spent more than 20 years as a mediator helping people resolve conflict. But here I talk about why conflict and distress show up in the first place and how changing the way we respond can make life a whole lot easier. Today, I want to talk about something that can feel a little uncomfortable when you first hear it, but if you let it land the right way, it's actually incredibly empowering. I want to talk about the idea that you are the common denominator in your own life. Before you get all worked up and think, oh great, here comes the everything is your fault conversation, let me just stop you right there. That's not what this is about. This is not about blame. This is about having agency. And those two things are very different. Blame leaves you feeling powerless, but having agency makes you feel powerful. And that is my intention here. So look, when something major is happening in your life, I'm not talking about something that you're watching on the news, not a conflict happening somewhere else in the world, not a story about someone you barely know, but something that is directly impacting you. That distinction really matters, especially here, because the idea of being the common denominator only applies to your own life. It's not something we use to explain or judge what's happening to other people or in the world at large, even though right now, media in all forms, and even people we know are constantly pulling on our empathy, asking us to emotionally engage with every single issue that's existing right now. And while empathy matters, it can also pull us away from places where life is actually speaking to us, to ourselves most directly. So for this conversation today, that is where I want to bring your attention back. That is to your own relationships, your own work, your own body, your own peace of mind, so that you can see that when disruption shows up there, when it's personal, when it's close, when you can't just scroll past it, that's when this question becomes useful. That's when it's worth getting curious about what the disruption is here to teach you. Before I go further, I think it's also important to be really clear about the kind of conflict I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the kind of disruption that might get under your skin, the kind that can mess with your sleep, hijack your thoughts, make you feel in your chest or stomach or your nervous system that something's not kosher. Maybe you're even saying like, why does this keep happening to me? Or you're in a relationship that suddenly explodes, a job that used to feel tolerable and now feels unbearable. Maybe it's a health issue that won't let you ignore your body anymore. Maybe it's a pattern you're sure you work through, but it keeps showing up again in a different form. So when conflict like this shows up this close and touches our lives, it means it's relevant and we need to pay attention. In fact, it's so disruptive sometimes it forces our attention. So here is the part that might feel a little resistant to you, but I want to say this clearly. You are always the one constant in every situation you have ever lived through. Different people, different jobs, different phases of life, different versions of you, but the one thing that has always been there is you. That makes you the common denominator. And honestly, I hope you see that as good news because if the common denominator were everyone else, you would be powerless. But since you're in the equation, you have access to the lesson, the shift, the choice that comes next. And I'm going to slow this down a little bit. I feel like I'm saying this over and over because this distinction matters so much. Being the common denominator does not mean you caused the harm. It does not mean you invited abuse. No, hard no. What it does mean is that life is inviting you to look at your alignment with your truth, alignment with your values, alignment with your boundaries, alignment with your body, the version of you that's trying to emerge next. Don't forget, As human beings, we're constantly evolving, we're constantly changing. So if you're holding yourself to a standard that you used to have 10 years ago, you are a completely different version of you now. So life is trying to get your attention that how you're behaving, your perceptions of the world, the way that you're living is no longer sustainable for who you are today in this moment, even if it was sustainable 10 years ago for you, right? This is where I like to reframe conflict entirely. So conflict shows up when something in your life is out of sync with who you're becoming. And if you ignore the early signals, life will tend to turn up the volume, right? The whisper becomes a nudge becomes a shove becomes the full-blown disruption. And that's because you're not listening. So let's talk about co-creating reality for a minute, because this idea gets misunderstood all the time. Co-creating your reality does not mean you control everything. You don't. It means you participate in your life through your choices, your boundaries, what you tolerate, what you avoid, and what you silence, and what you repeatedly override inside yourself. So life is going to respond to what you consistently agree to, not what you say you want. So if you're currently dating right now and you're constantly finding people who are not committing to you and ghosting you, and it's even though you're showing up and you're putting yourself out there and you're being vulnerable and you're stating clearly like what you're looking for, you keep experiencing the same type of person over and over again. And I think with this episode, I'm trying to show you is that you're the common denominator, and the way that you're responding to what's being presented to you and how you're doing things is not, you're behaving in a way where the experience is still showing up because you haven't seen what it's trying to show you. Because when the same conflict or disruptions or types of situations keep showing up in different costumes, that's not coincidence. Same dynamic, same person, same burnout, and I can tell you that actions are going to speak louder than your words, and that before you even give anyone your energy, let them consistently show you that they're invested. But you yourself are going to have to look deeply at like how you're behaving or perceiving situations is misaligned with actually what you're experiencing. When you change how you approach situations, you're going to get different responses. That's the common denominator theory. Patterns repeat to get your attention. So here's a question I love to ask, not from judgment, but from curiosity. If situations were here to move us towards alignment, then what would that alignment look like? What part of me has outgrown this? Where have I been overriding myself? What truth have I been negotiating with? Going back to the dating situation, if you're constantly meeting people who are inconsistent with their behaviors, whether it be commitment or reliability, whatever it may be, ask yourself these questions. What truth have I been negotiating? Where have I been overriding myself? And these are the types of questions that you should ask. Your body usually knows the answer. This is where toleration comes in, and this is a big one. A lot of us don't end up in painful situations because we make terrible choices. We end up there because we tolerate things long after they stop being true for us. We tolerate emotional mismatches. We tolerate disrespect dressed up as just how they are. We tolerate jobs that erode us. We tolerate dynamics that require us to shrink who we are. And then we're shocked when life reflects that right back to us or blows everything up. But that explosion didn't come out of nowhere. If you can look back, you will notice it came from your silence when you first started to feel these symptoms of misalignment. But it's important to think of it this way so we don't fall victim to self-blame. Use this as the moment where power comes back online. The moment you stop asking, why is this happening to me, and start asking, what is this asking of me? Something will shift. Back to the dating example. When you change how you approach dating, you will see a shift. You're going to move from reacting to other people to responding from clarity, from feeling like you're at mercy to your life to actively participating in it. And I've talked about this in previous episodes. This is actually what happens in my mediations. I've witnessed people go from why me, or what can I do to get out of this shitty situation or toxic pattern and never allow it again. And it always comes down to that specific perspective of changing the searching for the why to the what can I change moving forward? What is not working for me? How can I look at what I'm doing and change the outcome? And let me clarify that when you make that shift, it doesn't mean the situation magically resolves, but you will start to change your belief about it. And when you change your belief, you change how you behave. And that starts to shape a new perspective and new reality. So with this being said, if something is shaking your life right now, I want you to hear this clearly. You're just outgrowing what no longer fits you, and something truer is trying to emerge. And conflict, especially the kind that touches you directly, is often the doorway. This could be toxic boss came into the workplace and now you can't stand your job. And instead of feeling victimized or upset, definitely grieve the situation, but start looking at like what you can do about it and how you can get yourself out of this situation. Okay? Because the longer you stay in it, you're going to feel more disruption until you have no choice, and the decision will be made for you in the most dramatic way possible. And this is where the idea of becoming the common denominator becomes useful, because what we're really talking about here is not cause and effect, but reflection. Very often what's expressed externally mirrors something happening internally. Our inner world shapes what we tolerate, what we normalize, and what we push through, and what we override in ourselves. So over time, those internal patterns, they're going to show up outside of us. If someone finds themselves constantly getting fired or pushed out of jobs, not once or twice, but repeatedly, this isn't about labeling them as the problem. It's about noticing what might be getting reflected back. Most of the time, the outer instability mirrors an inner tension, a misfit between who you are and the structures you keep trying to survive inside of. It can reflect years of silencing your voice, or over-adapting, or forcing yourself into environments that don't align with your values or nervous system. Think about a woman who's in a workplace and can never get promoted because all of her male coworkers are getting promoted over her, and she continues to stay because they tell her how great she is at her job and how needed she is, but their actions aren't supporting that talk. But she holds on, thinking that one day it will. And then eventually another person gets promoted over top of her. And this has been going on for years. And then layoffs happening, and they decide to get rid of that position, and she's the one that loses her job. So she failed to get promoted over the years, stayed there, thinking, oh, one day they'll notice me and promote me. And then she's targeted. All along, looking back, she had many opportunities to stop tolerating the disrespect and to take her skill set somewhere where it's appreciated. So that termination was trying to tell her, you no longer fit here anymore. Just a reminder, I'm not a psychologist, but after spending so many years involved in conflict resolution, I've seen the patterns. Okay, let's move on to another practical example of internal patterns that show up externally. If you experience frequent discrimination, it's important to say, first of all, that discrimination is real. Just like that example I gave about the female not being promoted. And I don't want to say it's something that you create yourself, because it's not, but if it keeps showing up across different environments, the mirror isn't about blame. It's about where you're being asked to stop trying to belong in a system that does not have you in mind. And sometimes the external resistance reflects an inner knowing that you don't actually belong there, even if you've been trying to make it work. I mediate these types of disputes in my day job, and I tell people all the time, like I just said, take your skill set where it's appreciated. You will thrive where you are meant to be. If this company does not appreciate you because of your age, gender, race, think of yourself as the prize. You are the prize, and you will only grace those that appreciate you with your brilliance. I know it's hard when you have financial constraints, so it might involve micro movements like spending 1 hour a day job hunting or imagining the quote unquote perfect fit for you so you can start to align with that new belief that you do matter and you are entitled to belong. I genuinely believe if more people did this, it would shift corporate America. There would be a huge brain drain of talent at certain companies. Imagine if a company couldn't get women to be employed because they failed to promote them to leadership positions. So all the women refuse to bring their talents to this workplace. What would be the point if they could never grow, right? Guess what? That company would eventually have to shift, or they could lose a major subset of their customer base as well. What company wants to be known as not having a single woman working for them in this day and age? Let's see. Okay, let's look at something that often feels purely external. This is a fun one. Ending up next to neighbors who bring chaos, conflict, or a sense of threat into your space. I did a lot of early mediations with the courts, and I did a lot of like landlord-tenant disputes, barking dog neighbor disputes, and there are a lot of them out there. So this is a fun little example. If this keeps happening to you, it's easy to write this off as bad luck. And to be clear, you didn't cause anybody else's behavior. Other people's actions are their own. But when the same type of environment keeps showing up, it can hold reflective information, not about everybody else, but about you and what you've been tolerating, right? Because you're the common denominator. For a lot of people, chaos in the environment feels familiar, not comfortable, but familiar. Especially if you grew up around unpredictability, noise, conflict, or even emotional volatility. Your nervous system learned how to function in that. So when a new environment shows up that carries similar energy, part of you recognizes it and says, I know how to survive here. That doesn't mean you want it. It means your system knows it. The internal shift happens when you stop adapting to chaos and start prioritizing your regulation. When you notice how quickly you override your discomfort, when you realize how often you tell yourself it's not that bad, or I don't want to make a fuss with these people, I got to live next to them, or I'll just deal with it. Those are internal agreements. Guess what? Your environment will respond to that. So shifting this isn't about becoming aggressive or hypervigilant. It's about clarity, about recognizing that your need for peace, quiet, safety is valid, and it's not negotiable. It's just about, asserting your boundaries early. It's about choosing environments that support your nervous system, even if that feels unfamiliar at first. And here's the part people don't always expect. When you truly claim that internally, your external world will reorganize itself. Sometimes you're going to move. Sometimes the dynamic changes and they move. You simply don't tolerate what you're used to. And because of that, you stop finding yourself in same situations over and over again. So again, being the common denominator doesn't mean you cause the chaos. It means you're attracted to it in some way because it's trying to get your attention. You've learned to live with it. And now you have the opportunity to decide whether that still fits you. It's a choice point. The moment your internal relationship to safety will shift, everything in your environment will end up to. You can apply this same way of thinking to family dynamics, because that's another place where mirroring shows up powerfully. Difficult family members, especially when the roles never seem to change, often reflect old internal roles that are still being carried forward. The external conflict may be mirroring how long you've been suppressing your own needs to maintain peace, or how much responsibility you've been holding that was never yours to begin with. In that sense, the friction is just like a signal, a signpost that you're outgrowing the version of yourself that learned how to survive inside that system. You're evolving. It no longer fits who you are. And I hope this way of looking at things feels freeing. There's something powerful about realizing you have that kind of influence over your own experience, clarity about yourself and how you participate. We can't ever change how other people act. So I think it's important to always just focus on like what we can do differently. At the same time, I do want to slow us down here because there are situations where this lens has to be held a little more gently. Being the common denominator in your own life doesn't mean every circumstance exists because of you. It just means that you're the one living inside it, right? And the one being shaped by it and the one responding to it. When we're talking about chronic or reoccurring health issues, illness is not a moral failure and the body is not keeping score. Nothing about being sick means that you've done something wrong. But when the body continues to speak, especially in the same ways, it can sometimes be reflecting something that's being carried internally for a very long time. Maybe years of stress, years of fear, years of overriding your limits in the name of surviving. So the mirror is an invitation to listen differently, to relate to yourself with more honesty and care. I was reminded of this recently while listening to a podcast where a woman had called in with a question about her health. She had been dealing with a series of physical issues, and the doctors were eventually able to narrow it down to toxin exposure. The issue became that all the treatments that they had advised her to do were not clearing the toxins. Nothing was working. And it was getting to the point where they were going to have to do more invasive interventions. And she was understandably scared. She kept asking, why isn't my body responding? And what struck me wasn't the medical details. It was the question the host asked her next. He asked what all of this was bringing up for her emotionally, what she was feeling as she went through it. Because regardless of the cause, she was the one experiencing it, and that mattered. And as she started talking, it became clear that she was carrying a lot of fear and anger. She was worried about her status in this country. She was afraid of being deported. It was a threat that she had lived with for a very long time. It was always in the background, always present, and even if she didn't think about it consciously every day, it was still there. And as I listened, something clicked for me. There was a belief she had been carrying all along, one shaped by her experience. There was a belief that she was a foreign object in a larger body, that she didn't fully belong in this country. And here she was dealing with a health issue where her own body was struggling to release foreign toxins, substances that didn't belong. Get it? See the mirror? Foreign toxins in her body, a foreign person in a different country thinking she doesn't belong. It was so clear to me. I'm not saying she created her illness. That's not how this works. But the mirror was striking. Her body was quite literally holding on to something it perceived as foreign, just as she had been holding on to a belief that she was foreign, at a place, at risk, not fully allowed to even exist where she was. So when you're seeing it through this lens, the question shifts. It's no longer just, why isn't my body cooperating? It becomes, what has my body been carrying alongside me all these years? What beliefs, what fears, what internal narratives have been living there too? And this is where being the common denominator in your own life becomes meaningful. It becomes like relationship, right? She was the one living inside that body, the one whose nervous system had been on high alert for years. Acknowledging that belief, really seeing it, gives her the chance to reckon with it, to question it, to change it, because she belongs wherever she decides to belong. And when the internal story begins to shift, the body often has more room to respond differently too. It's not going to be instant healing, but as alignment, as cooperation, as the system finally feels safe enough to let go. So again, the mirror isn't the illness itself, it's the relationship you have with yourself while living inside the reality of having an illness. And being the common denominator simply means you're the one who gets to listen and change what wants to change next. Okay, everybody. I hope this was enlightening. I'm going to wrap up here. I really hope that looking at conflict from this perspective feels empowering. Not because you're in control of everything that happens, but because you're living in relationship with your life. And when you start to see it that way, it becomes easier to recognize which relationship patterns or dynamics are no longer serving you. Until next time, don't react, but respond with intention.